to episode 6 of Peppermint Philosophy. I'm your host, Adam Burgess. I've been on hiatus for like 2 and a bit weeks because with lockdown easing, I went home for about 10 days and haven't really had any ideas over the last few days. But things are moving forward. Me and my mates have actually sat down and we've recorded a couple of podcasts together, so that'll be coming out soon. I'm going to be uploading to the same website. It's a bit more of a chilled thing, but I think some of the conversations we have are along similar vibes to this, getting, just sort of thinking about ideas. And I've just we recorded one today and it got me thinking a little bit about social media. I thought I might as well discuss some of the problems I see with social media and probably why I think disconnecting from it is actually a pretty good idea. So must have been at least around the beginning of lockdown, probably even before, I came across this guy called Jaron Lanier, or Jaron Lanier, I don't know how you'd say it. But he's this... he was a guy who is considered like the godfather of VR and virtual reality kind of stuff. He's this computer scientist and computer programmer who's worked in Silicon Valley, doing all sorts of work, making video games and essentially working on VR technology. And he's a very interesting person. I would 100% recommend listening to his TED Talk. But he's done a series of interviews where he's effectively talking about the harms of social media and the effect it kind of has on people in general. And so listening to some of his arguments, it kind of got me thinking about my own relationship with social media. And I picked up a book of his called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. Although I didn't actually get to read it. Because I accidentally got it delivered to my parents' house. So I had to, and this was right at the beginning of lockdown, so I never actually picked it up until about 2 weeks ago. I read it in the space of that 2 weeks, but long before that, I deleted my social media account. Well, I say all of my social media accounts. I deleted my Facebook and Instagram and my Twitter, but I hardly ever used Twitter. And I just kind of want to maybe reflect on why I did that. And why maybe it's worth everyone kind of rethinking their relationship with social media. So one thing that Jaron talks about quite frequently is it's sort of the idea of these social media social media websites, and in fact even things, search engine websites as well. He refers to them as these behavioral modification empires almost. And it sounds a bit wacky and out there and crazy, I guess, because it does sound a bit over the top. But I think when you think about it, it's not too far from the truth, right? If we think about how social media are conducting a lot of their business, they don't make money from us, the users. We get the product, in inverted commas, for free. So we just go on it, use the platform, and go about our day, whatever it might be, contacting our friends, liking, sharing stuff, whatever it is. But we aren't the customer. The customer is actually the advertisers, the people who are paying money to have their adverts up on this social media platform. So that sounds great because it's a way in which this service can be provided for free to everyone. It sounds great. But you know how there's that sort of common term thrown around that nothing's free. There's always some kind of cost. I think that kind of applies We're not really paying for social media with our money. We're paying for it with our data. We're paying for it with our information. And there's been so much stuff, you can look back in the news, even more currently now, they're starting to talk about it in Congress. But there's been this, all of this uproar with data being sold, used, bought by the highest bidder, whatever it might be. And that's all going on in the background. Meanwhile, we're using social media to share all of those things and keep that machine going. But where does this whole behavioral modification thing come in? Behavioral modification can be probably described best in the algorithm stuff. And that's a term I think a lot of us throw about a lot because we hear it a lot in the news. We hear about these advertisement algorithms, things like that. And these algorithms, they probably, and this is my personal view, that this isn't factual whatsoever, but I can see where they came from, right? These kinds of models, we know what they are. When we go on Spotify or Amazon or YouTube or whatever, when we get those recommendations, those are these algorithms basically looking at what we're interacting with, so the kind of music that we like to listen to, and then recommending us other artists, for example, that create similar music or who are, additional songs from those bands that we're listening to, whatever it might be. And that isn't so bad, right? We're listening to the same, the kinds of music we like. We're getting more of the stuff that we enjoy listening to. And we're getting optimal entertainment, I suppose you could argue. But imagine if life was like that, we're sat around, we're observing things. And say, for example, we like trees and the colour green and nature and fresh air and all of that sort of stuff. And imagine if the universe around us was picking and changing things based on where we go. So we've got a city and a forest, and we spend a lot of time walking in the forest. And the more we do that, the more it's like, oh, well, Adam likes going in the forest, so we'll just delete some of the city bit and focus more on this forest. And maybe we'll put in trees and mushrooms and all sorts of other cool stuff that he can interact with and view. And then it gets to a point where it narrows down and down and down and down to the point where I can't then go back to the city and enjoy that with any sense of ease. It's not just there anymore. It's a small thing I have to then start interacting with in turn in order to shift the algorithm back. And that's probably a really bad analogy, but I feel like that's a good way of describing how these things can narrow us down into these bubbles where they're shifting our behavior. And part of it is our behavior influencing the machine, but then in turn, the machine is feeding back and offering us other stimuli, which in turn we'll either interact with more or we won't, and it will learn from that. And I think this is the basic principle of how these algorithms work. And so you can imagine there are harmless applications to this, or relatively harmless applications to this, where it's maybe, Netflix suggesting TV shows like other TV shows that you've watched, or Spotify recommending you albums or bands or songs that are similar to the ones that you like to listen to. That's relatively harmless and mundane. But when does applying that kind of an algorithm to your life suddenly shift and become sinister? And that can be in all sorts of regions like politics, philosophy, even your entire lifestyle, right? So we have so many things on Facebook, for example, where you're scrolling down and you watch, say, a video because it pops up and you're like, oh, this looks interesting. Like, I remember one thing that for me that became like a trend was that I was scrolling through once and there was this video of some guy building like a house out of Lego or something. I watched it through because it was like, oh, this is cool. Then the next day, there were suddenly more of these videos, and it got to the point where suddenly every time I refreshed the page, there would definitely be a Lego video of some dude building a Lego house or car, cool stuff. I mean, it's cool. But then think about how sinister that becomes if suddenly sorry, there's a lot of traffic outside, and it's so hot that I've got the windows open. Suddenly you're sat there, and say you are watching you're watching some newspaper, you've liked some newspaper or a politician who's left or right wing, whatever it might be. You start watching it, you like it, you comment, something like that. It starts off relatively mundane. And then, bit by bit, you're getting more and more of these things recommended to you. It's offering you these different politicians, different newspapers on the left or the right, different things which are more in line with whatever you've been commenting on. And it starts, providing you with these stimuli which are provoking you to actually interact with the machine, and you're getting to this point where you get more and more boxed into these small little bubbles of ideas, and you get this sort of weird pack mentality forming. I feel that's the sinister side of it, is that you can end up being shifted so far in one direction or the other that suddenly your new reality, your new truth becomes whatever side you happen to be boxed into, because this machine is basically trying to optimize its ability to get ad revenue from you. I guess that's probably a pretty bad way. I've probably done a poor job of summing up that aspect to it, the behavioral aspect to it. But now imagine that you got to think that these people probably didn't have that intention when they did it. They were thinking, well, what's the optimal way for us to make money from this model that we have? Oh, well, obviously get people to interact with the kinds of things that they want to interact with. Surely that's fine. But I don't think there was that foresight of the ramifications of what that could mean socially. We end up with these situations where people get so blindly attached to one side or the other to the point they cannot see the other side as, well, I mean, in some ways as human. They become the other. You have your side. You have your pack mentality. And this is something that Jaron talks about a lot in the book, is that you have this idea of pack mentality, and the pack mentality overrides your individual idea. And he has this brilliant analogy where it's talking about how essentially collectives are most optimal when it's a collective of individuals with their own individual perspectives, thoughts, and ideas. So there's a thing I think he said it was in business schools, where people, or where the lecturer, say he or she asks, they've got like a jar of jelly beans, and they're like, guess the number of jelly beans in this jar. And each person will give a number. And usually if you were to take the average of that number, or the average of all of the answers given to you by the students or the entire class, you'll get something close to the truth. It might not be exactly the number of jelly beans, but it's in the right ballpark. You get a pretty accurate idea of how many jelly beans there are. And that's because you've got different people looking at it in different ways. And you can think of that as an idea or a problem or anything that we can come across in the world. The plethora of different viewpoints that exist can provide us with this almost, this, when they come together and when we work together and use all of those ideas and perspectives to come to some kind of communal truth, sometimes that is possibly the best synthesis of ideas, right? But the problem with social media is that suddenly in this class you have maybe someone misinforming or spreading rumors about how, oh, you can't trust whoever the jelly bean manufacturer is, or you have the jelly bean manufacturers posting different images posting stuff about how there need to be more jelly beans and how getting more jelly beans is better. And then you have other misinformers posting pictures of different jars all over the place, but look kind of similar, but it's not exactly the same. And then suddenly you've warped people's perspectives of the actual problem, which is the jar of jelly beans and how many jelly beans are in there. And it's become this kind of misinformation hailstrom. And also people are then suddenly forming teams and divisions on what they believe the problem with the number of jelly beans is. I've kind of gone on like a bit of a rant there, and it kind of probably doesn't make sense. But the point is that you can, with all of these different entities trying to dig in and shift people's behavior around and basically fuck with what's going on and shatter the whole focus of, this is the problem, the jelly beans and the number of them that there are in this jar. And so that's happening all the time, probably, with social media. And you've got this whole shifting of people's behavior, this adjustment of it, to the point where I think, for myself, speaking personally, I didn't realize how much I was attached to Facebook. I mean, a lot of my friends who know me for a while know that there were times where I was very vocal on Facebook. I had this idea that by voicing my opinion, I was doing my bit and I could convince one or two people, maybe. And I was writing these fucking essays that no one was really reading. I had one mate, God bless him, I respect it now. He used to take the piss out of me. And it was absolutely right. I was just a fucking idiot. Why was I was literally wasting the better part of an hour writing this shit. And when push comes to shove, I was also then, after I posted it, checking my notifications to see how many likes I got. I think a lot of us are in that situation. I'm not bashing people. I was exactly this, right? This is what me. I'm a bit ashamed of it or whatever, but it is kind of the nature of the beast. But I feel like I was dragged into this very I've dragged onto one side, and I held kind of ideas which I think probably went quite against my gut instinct, because I was, now I was part of this team, and part of this team means we subscribe to these ideas, we listen to these people, and it's very easy to get dragged into this position where you're listening to the same voices, their takes on the news, their ideas, you're consuming just bullshit. And anyone who claims that their side has all of the answers to the world's problems, they're selling you quite frankly a lie. Because the beautiful idea of social media was to bridge the gaps in communication, to bring people together from across the world, and to be able to share ideas freely, and to come, there's that whole sort of idea of, you have the thesis, the antithesis, and in the middle, you then have the synthesis, where the two ideas kind of meet, discuss, and then they form a consensus, and that's the new thesis. And so that I think is the stem. That's like the ideal of social media. That's what we want it to be. That's what we pray that it is. And there are good sides to social media, of course. It's not an evil thing. It's not intended to be bad for people. It's an accident that it's become that way. I think it speaks more about our own relationship with technology and what it means to be human, but that's a conversation for another time. The problem I think we have with this, this idea of connection with other people is that, yes, we may be able to talk with someone halfway across the world and share ideas with them and listen to the things that they do. But how often do we actually do that? How often do we actually listen to what someone else's opinion is going to be? Because chances are, if they're somewhere across the world, they're going to have a totally different reality to ours, a totally different status quo, which means that they're going to have ideas which we disagree with. They're going to have, we're going to have ideas that they disagree with. I think the problem is that you've left this behavioral experiment, which is, offering you stimuli and seeing how you react to it. And it's just kind of out there. People can just take from it. And they have, right? The whole stuff about Russian hackers, terrorist organizations, gangs using social media to recruit. It's preying on this sense of, needing a recognition that we can get from social media. It's reaching out to these people and trying to... I'm really sort of going on tangents here. There's so much stuff which I'm just going out in every direction. I'll try and bring it back to the main point now. But it's just this experiment which is just left out there. There's no control, really. We're just letting this machine learn from us, and then we're interacting with it, and then it's feeding back and constantly changing and adapting and pushing us into these circles and these bubbles where we are essentially... we find it very difficult to get out. And we have this pack mentality, and the pack mentality, I think, is the big switch. Because once we stop, and this is coming back to the jelly bean stuff, once we stop thinking as individuals and we replace our individuality with the collective idea or the pack idea, suddenly we're parroting what we've heard someone else say instead of actually processing what they've said, running it against our own ideas and challenging it with that, and then either changing how we think or rejecting what they've said. And I'm not saying that it's you don't have that in normal life. You do have that in normal life as well. There are plenty of examples where you could get the same thing from a newspaper, right? You could buy a newspaper and it's opinion pieces, and you're basically learning what someone else has to say on a certain situation or a problem, and then you're repeating what they've said. The only thing I'd say is that the difference is that with a newspaper or a news channel, at least you actually have to go out, watch it, seek it out. When you're on social media, it's literally given to you. There's so much news that I used to see just from scrolling. And I'd say news. It isn't really news. It was just shit. I maybe you disagree with me, but I feel like a big source of my own, waste of time, the lack of pursuit of reading and hanging out with friends even, was because I was so attached to this shitty thing. I was replacing actual conversations with people with messages on Facebook, and it dehumanizes everything. And when you have that sort of pack mentality, you dehumanize the people on the other side, which is just as bad. Surely we should be engaging with them, understanding where they've come from, being respectful, and hopefully offering them an alternative if that's what your goal is. Or to learn from them and realize, maybe they have a point. Maybe what I was thinking wasn't the total truth, which is fine as well. I mean, but it makes that whole interaction impossible when you have this... essentially, you're interacting with a screen. You're not really it's not really bringing people together, I wouldn't say. It keeps people connected. That's the one really good thing I feel. But I guess sort of this is all over the place. I don't know. I might re-listen to all of this and just change it, or I might just pop it out there. I'm not sure. This kind of stuff has just been on my mind for a while, and I just thought, seeing as I'd had a conversation, I probably had a much more lucid conversation with my mates on Peppermint Chill, which will be coming out soon. So keep an eye out for that. But I just thought I wanted to kind of just have a little brainstorm and just figure that, or kind of throw out my ideas or my thoughts on the subject. Shifting gear a little bit, one of the big things for me, what I realized as I was deleting it, is how, and I think I had this conversation with a friend of mine, my mate Jake, who is on Peppermint Chill. We talked about how things like Facebook have they've drowned out the meaning of the word friendship. You know, we have friends on Facebook friends. There are some people upwards in the thousands of friends on Facebook, and it's just like, I mean, who are half these? You can't, as a single human being, be able to keep in touch and interact with all 1,000 of these people. So why are you friends with them on Facebook? Why have them following you and interacting with you? What's the point if you're never going to talk? Pardon me. If these are people that you're never going to talk to, you have no interest in talking to, that's the other thing. Why would you bother having them on your Facebook so you can see what they're doing? And more interestingly, why would you want them to see what you're doing? It doesn't make sense. And I feel like there was this, when I was deleting it, I remember I was going through and I was finding people I wanted to keep in touch with. I was collecting phone numbers, basically going old school. And I was combing through this list, and I felt a little bit sad as I was doing, because I was like, well, there are people on here that, people I've known at some point in my life, I guess, but at the time I was saying known for a long time, there's no point in me taking their phone number because I'm never going to contact them again. But there are also people that I haven't talked to in years. And I was a little bit sad, like, oh, it's a shame. These people are going to be out of my life now. I'm never going to probably, unless I run into them somewhere, I'm never going to talk to them again. But I was just like, after I'd collected the phone numbers, I was a bit like, but who were these people? I was never going to meet up with them, hang out with them, chat with them, catch up with them. That time's come and gone, I'm not friends with them anymore. We aren't friends. I haven't kept in contact with them. We diluted the meaning of that word. My friends are the people who I care about, who I want to keep up with, who make me feel better, who I want to be better as well. Those are the people I want to keep in touch with. Those are the people I want to talk to. I don't care about random people who I once knew and who I have no real intention of contacting and meeting up with, or whatever it might be, because whatever we might have been, friends in the past, that's kind of gone. And now I've kind of learned to appreciate more the friends who I've kept in touch with. And when you cut away, when you prune the tree, it can grow back stronger and better and cleaner, and it doesn't have so many useless, wasted branches. And so I was pruning my tree, and I realized, there's this, beautiful tree made up of these friends that I actually, love and care about, and who I want to keep in touch with. And now I can work with keeping in touch with a lot of these people, and from there we can, that I can actually appreciate messaging them, texting them, calling them, and enjoying those times more. I make more of an effort to, keep in touch with them, see how they're doing, because I don't have all of this noise in the background constantly influencing it. I think that's an important process, however you end up doing it. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to delete all of your social media. It doesn't mean you have to cut away all of the people you interact with. But I'd say there's something valuable in knowing why you're doing something and who are the important people in your life. Now, I'd say that the one big argument that I've heard from a lot of people is, well, if you're not going to do it for free, I mean, data, for first point, is that data's already out there. Everyone's taking it anyway, so what's the big problem? Well, just because everyone's doing something doesn't make it right. You know, it's just because everyone's taking data and trading it or whatever, it's still wrong. We shouldn't abide by it. We shouldn't put up with it, and we should try and minimize how much we contribute to that machine. As far as I'm concerned, that's what I'm aiming to do. I'm not saying by any means, I'm not trying to be, on my high horse, holier than thou. I still use some of these services. I'm still on YouTube. I still have a Google account. I'm not the perfect specimen. It's hard to be, right? Because these things they're so intertwined in our lives. But what I would say is that Facebook and Instagram were probably the biggest time consumers for me, and I was probably interacting with them the most. And so peeling back from those really did improve both my mental health and how, my feelings of not being a part of this, essentially this machine of just bullshit. The other argument that is actually quite a good one, I'd say, is that you don't get there's this concept of the free exchange of ideas, and and if you put some kind of prohibition on that, and so that, because one of the main solutions, right, of trying to solve this problem is basically not allowing an ad-based system. So how would you pay for that then? That means that you have to pay for it monetarily, i.e. we become the customers. And Jaron talks about this brilliantly. And it's either, you can do it in a way that it's like a subscription service. And in doing that, we become the customers if we want to use it. But, a lot of people say, rightly, a lot of people don't want to do that. Not many people would want to pay money for social media, and they might end up going to some new social media thing which doesn't do that, which is totally true. I mean, when it comes to the value of things, we don't tend to see the value of, say, our data, really, because it doesn't have any monetary value. We can't buy things that we need or want with our data. So yes, that's difficult, and it would potentially create this tier system, right? So if you can afford or whatever, social media, suddenly you're the ones who can then interact and exchange ideas with people, but people who are less privileged wouldn't be able to, which is perfectly valid. There are all sorts of arguments about, well, you could have some kind of support system for people who can't afford it, etc., etc., etc. What I'd say, though, is that there are things that are more valuable than money. And I'd say your ability to be the master of your own ideas and your thoughts is far more valuable. Because if we think about it, it's like, how can you have a free exchange of ideas? Even if we accept the idea that there is a behavior changing aspect to the algorithm, and we might disagree, I don't think you can dispute that there is one, right? I disagree if you said that there is no behavioral changing aspect. I don't have any evidence at hand, but I think we all know deep down that that's happening. So if we accept that as a fact, that people's behaviors are being changed, We can debate how much it's being changed or shifted, and how much people are being put into different bubbles of ideas and packs. Even if it's a small amount, how can you have a free exchange of ideas if you're being influenced by these packs, these bubbles, if your thoughts are being changed by the way that, essentially you're interacting with things on this platform? If that's the case, you can't really have a free exchange of ideas, because your freedom to have your own ideas has already been kind of sold to the highest bidder, almost. Maybe that's me just being a little bit too, I don't know, I don't want to say unrealistic, but being a bit over dramatic about it. But I think there's something to that, because we're kind of auctioning off our ability to think for ourselves. I can't remember the philosopher who talked about it. I'm going to kick myself because I should have written it down. But it's like, how, the idea of how can you be free if you're essentially relying on others to give you your ideas, if you're just parroting these concepts that you've heard someone else say. And to an extent, I'd agree, you have to do that to an extent, because no one's an expert in everything. No one can have an opinion on everything. We have to kind of digest what other people say about it, potentially. But if you've got this thing which is actively trying to change your behavior to get more revenue, sure, how you can't be free to think. That's the bit that worries me the most. We're so hung up on economics, and it seems to be the thing that dominates every election. It seems to be the thing that dominates everything. We're so worried about monetary things, and it's understandable why, right? It's totally understandable, because people, there are people who are less privileged. There are people who need to focus on, they're living paycheck to paycheck, whatever it might be. But there's something, it's disappointing that we don't seem to have the same respect. We have economic freedom and control is something that we frequently day-to-day debate and discuss. But we infrequently debate and discuss the nature of our own personal and social freedom, which I'd argue is probably where we should be starting this debate from. And I'm going to sidetrack a little bit here, but this is another thing that I've been thinking about with reading Gulag Archipelago, is how there's almost this idea that through economic systems and changing economic systems, you can change the behavior of people. And I feel like so many very, very intelligent philosophers and thinkers have fallen into that trap, where they believe that, the economic system is the vehicle for changing societal behavior and people's perceptions of things. I just don't think that's true. I think it needs to start the other way around. In order to be better as a society, we need to start thinking and understanding why we think certain things, why we believe certain things, to constantly question and challenge ourselves. But I don't think social media promotes that. I think quite the opposite. It promotes bubbling up, getting into your little circle jerk of like-minded people. Not even like-minded people. People who fell into the same behavioral changing trap that you did, until you kind of morph this weird set of ideas based on the same people that you all follow. I think there's something we need to all be careful of. We should be aware of these things. We should think about it. And if we judge that social media is the cause of those problems, those discrepancies, maybe it's time that we peel back from it, spend less time on it, delete the dead wood around, your non-friends, or better yet, delete the accounts that affect you the most. Okay, I'm going to read a section from 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts. And this is just a bit of pretext and, I guess, a definition. So he's talking about this woman who was trying to contact early Google about something that was popping up about her when you searched her name, and she didn't want it to be there. And then the definition is that he refers to these behavioral modification empires as things called bummers. So you'll hear me saying that a lot. Okay. It was an interesting moment for Google's early crew. Should they heed the desperate demands of the woman to do something about her situation? Or should they trust that in the bigger picture, the harm would be outdone by a greater good? This sort of issue is old news today, but unfortunately, lives can still be ruined. Uber, which is pseudo-bummer, called the ability to spy on people the God view. From the amazing godlike perspective of Silicon Valley, either people or algorithms can always see who has written what and when, who looked it up and read it and when. We can see the whole process, as if we're looking in on an ant farm. And the little ants know it. They know they're being watched. The woman wrote increasingly impassioned pleas for help. Some people in the office that day felt sorry for her, while some laughed at her. That sense of being an ant, watched by supposedly superior beings who are actually not superior at all, but just the same old people from school, just the ones who happen to get bummer jobs. That feeling is degrading and depressing. And let me remind you that negative emotions are more readily accessible and more profitable bummer magnets for people than positive ones. If ordinary people were to get all happy and satisfied, they might take a moment away from the obsession with social media numbers and go frolic in the flowers, or even pay direct attention to each other. But if they're all on edge about whether they're popular enough, worried about whether the world is imploding, or furious at morons who are thrust into the middle of their connections with friends and families, then they dare not disengage. They're hooked because of provoked natural vigilance. We in Silicon Valley like to watch the ants dig harder into their dirt. They send us money as we watch. The imbalanced power relationship is in your face all the time. Don't you feel humiliated using one of the Facebook brands like Instagram or WhatsApp? Facebook is the first public company controlled by one person. I mean, I don't personally have anything against Mark Zuckerberg. It isn't about him. But why would you subordinate a big part of your life to any one stranger? When I was growing up, there were big politicians, rich people, pop stars, captains of industry, and all that. But none of them got to run my life in any substantial way. They influenced me now and then by saying something that caught my attention, but that was it. They remained far away from my personal life. I suspect that even though you might say it doesn't bother you, on some level you know it does. And there's no point in being angry because you can't see any way to do anything about it. But there is. Delete your accounts. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.